Hello, this is Dr. Donna Burnett. In this lesson, we will consider food preservation methods. Let's get started. By the end of this chapter, you should be able to summarize the biological, chemical, and physical changes of food spoilage, describe the food preservation methods of drying, smoking, curing, fermentation, pickling, edible coatings, and canning. List all the factors to consider when refrigerating or freezing foods. Compare the different types of heat preservation, boiling, pasteurization, and omic. Explain the other preservation methods of irradiation, radio frequency, pulsed light, high-pressure processing, and ozonation. And recognize the food nutrients that are and are not affected by processing. I'll go ahead and tell you that the slides do not cover all of this, but your textbook does. The slides go along with your textbook, but they do not replace your textbook, especially for this chapter. One thing we know is that there is a lot of food spoilage in this country. The USDA estimates that is about 20% of all food that is produced is lost to food spoilage. The average North American family discards about 1/4 of their food. Think about that in your home growing up, or even now, how much gets thrown away. One reason that it gets thrown away is because of spoilage. You have biological, chemical, and physical issues related to food spoilage and discarding food. Now, you've already heard the food safety chapter, and this will intersect with that and cover a little bit different point of view, but we're still talking about the same things: biological, chemical, and physical. We're just not talking about foodborne infection right now. We're talking about food spoilage that would cause you not to be able to eat the food. Food spoilage is obvious and detectable. Food contamination, which has to do with food safety, is often undetectable because of the microorganisms. Not all foods spoil at the same rate. Some foods are more perishable than others. We have 3 categories: perishable, semi-perishable, and non-perishable. If you look at the non-perishable category, those are things that you can keep for a long time and still be able to eat them. Nuts, cereals, tea leaves, pastas, dried beans. Notice the absence of moisture in these items. That's what makes them non-perishable. Semi-perishable would be potatoes, carrots, beets, turnips, onions, and apples. They will spoil, but it takes longer than the highly perishable foods that have a large concentration of protein and or water, or both. We're talking about fish, seafood, meat, eggs, and dairy, watery fruits, and vegetables. Biological changes can be summarized as effects of microorganisms, bacteria, yeast, molds. Chemical changes can be summarized as related to enzymes, proteases, lipases, and carbohydrases. Remember, if it ends in ASE, it's an enzyme. And then physical changes. This doesn't have to do with forming new compounds. This has to do with evaporation, drying out, drip loss, and separation. This is an example of a technology that's used to help detect spoilage. It's a dot that's on there. It's a biosensor sticker, and it can be scanned with a smartphone to see if there's any degree of spoilage. If you've ever seen one of those, you may not have known what it was for, but you can scan it with your phone. So when we talk about food preservation methods, we're looking at ways to keep food from spoiling. Food preservation methods that we see in chemical protection would be any way to prevent changes from exposure to gases, moisture, or light. Biological protection prevents contact with microorganisms, rodents, insects, and other animals. And then physical protection prevents mechanical damage. Some of the food preservation methods will be discussed in the following slides. There are other possibilities, but these are the ones that your textbook is focusing on, and these are the ones that we're going to talk a little more about. So drying works because it reduces the moisture, and remember from your food safety, fat time, the ingredients you need for microorganism growth. One, the M was moisture. So if you dry the food, it has a longer shelf life. Think about jerky. That's dried meat, and it's not refrigerated, and it stays safe. So you have sun drying, then you have commercial drying, which would be conventional drying, spray drying, drum drying, vacuum drying, osmotic drying, freeze drying, microwave drying, and there are pre-treatments for these. Figure 28-2 shows the typical freeze drying process. So you have food on heated trays, the introduction of water vapor, and then as the food goes through the process, there is a freezer condenser and a vacuum pump. Figure 28-3 shows apples being checked after coming out of a freeze dryer. Okay, so drying is a major food preservation method, but we have others. We have curing, smoking, fermentation, pickling, edible coatings, canning, and in canning we have boiling and pressure canning. Figure 28-4 shows selected food products produced by fermentation. So cheese, yogurt, buttermilk, and sour cream are all produced from milk. Sausages such as salami and bologna. Also, fish can be preserved with sauces and pastes. Grains can be preserved through yeast breads, beer and sake, and whiskey. Vegetables can be preserved, pickles, green olives, sauerkraut, kimchi, and then soybeans can be preserved as miso, soy sauce, natto, sufu, and tempeh. And grapes are preserved by making wine through fermentation. Cold preservation, we have refrigeration and freezing. So let's talk about refrigeration first. This slows down the biological, chemical, and physical reactions that shorten the shelf life of food. Perishable foods should be refrigerated. Plastic bags used to store vegetables or fruit should have holes in them. That is to allow for the airflow and the air circulation. Refrigerator temperatures and times are important. So we want to keep the temperature just above freezing, but not more than 40 degrees, because higher than that would be the unsafe zone, the danger zone. And as far as times, that will depend on the food item itself as to how long you can preserve it through refrigeration. Freezing will give you a longer storage time, but not all foods are suitable for freezing. You also have some problems with frozen food. You can have freezer burn, cell rupturing, which can change the texture of the food when you heat it, fluid loss, and recrystallization. So recrystallization would be when food inadvertently or intentionally was defrosted and then not used, and it's put back in the freezer. Here's an example of freezer burn on cut string beans. Heat preservation includes boiling and some other ways to generate the heat. Pasteurization is a high temperature process that destroys microorganisms and allows milk to be drinkable for a longer time. Ohmic heating is where you have an electrical current passing through the food that generates enough heat to destroy microorganisms. Figure 28-7 is an illustration about ohmic heating. So you have the electrode on the top and bottom. The food is in the middle of that, and then there's an alternating current power supply that sends an electrical current through that food, produces enough heat to destroy microorganisms. Other preservation methods you have irradiation, which is similar to pasteurization, but it uses a cold method. There's not everybody is in agreement of whether this is the best way to preserve food, but we're seeing it done. Radio frequency, pulse light, high pressure processing, ozonation, aseptic packaging. Now that's where we have modified atmospheric packaging, controlled atmospheric packaging, and vacuum packaging. And this is where the wrapper for the food is modified in a way that keeps it from coming into contact with as much oxygen. These are some foods that are approved for irradiation in the United States. Wheat flour, white potatoes, certain fruits and vegetables, seeds for sprouting, herbs and spices, red meats, shellfish, raw poultry, fresh shell eggs, dry enzyme preparations, and dry spices or seasonings. Figure 28-8, it shows an image of an irradiator in which the product is lowered below ground so that you don't have to have all the cement shielding to protect people that are doing the work. You may or may not have ever seen an illustration like this. Your book is going to have a lot more information than what I'm able to tell you in this lecture. So please refer to your book for more details. Here is a great example of how irradiated strawberries are still a lot fresher than non-irradiated strawberries that have been refrigerated for 17 days. This is the sign or symbol that you will see on food that has been irradiated. Other preservation methods include pulse light, as you see in Figure 8-11, the effect of pulse light on Staphylococcus aureus. Your control Petri dish and your pulse light Petri dish shows the effectiveness of the pulse light. Here's an example of the modified atmospheric packaging. You may have seen this in the grocery store. It's relatively common. And this does reduce the contact of the food to oxygen while it's in that packaging. The next few slides show you some charts for storing food at what temperature and for how long. Ham, if it's canned, can last a significant amount of time, 6 to 9 months. Cooked whole ham, 7 days, so it's about a week. Cooked half ham or slices, 3 to 5 days. And that's because it has been processed further by cutting it and slicing it. Luncheon meats, again, because they're salted usually. Unopened can be 2 weeks. Opened can be 1 week. Typically, we don't want to keep food for more than a week, unless it's an exception, like if it's canned or unopened. And again, these food products are all marked to use by with a use by date. Sausages, fresh sausage 7 days, smoked sausage 3 to 7 days, dry sausage 2 to 3 weeks. Over on the other side we have fish and shellfish. Fish and poultry are highly perishable, especially poultry. Poultry 1 to 2 days, and then you have dairy products, and here again you have to look at the use by date. In general, milk is going to be more perishable than anything else in that dairy section. Okay, butter, couple weeks. Again, check your use by date. And then cheese, if it's soft cheese like cottage cheese or ricotta cheese, a week is usually about all you'll get from that. The hard cheeses, you can usually use up to 6 months. Again, you'll see dates on those. Produce, leafy vegetables, about a week. Fruits, such as peaches, berries, and plums, will last about a week. But apples, pears, and citrus fruit will be good for about 2 weeks. But notice the temperatures. So peaches, berries, and plums, 50 degrees Fahrenheit, which sometimes in a refrigerator there'll be a fruit bin where you can change the moisture level, and and it might not get as cold as the rest of the refrigerator, but there is that. And then apples, pears, and citrus can be kept at room temperature up to 70 degrees, or they can be refrigerated. Now we're talking about dry storage. Again, the temperature 50 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, so that's a cool storage area, depending on how cool the area is. Will also depend on how long it's perishable. Retake that. Talking about dry storage, between 50 and 70 degrees Fahrenheit, root vegetables will last anywhere from 7 to 30 days, and you just have to observe them to see signs of decay. Breads and cereals, that varies. Check your use by date. Tomatoes are a little more perishable, 3 to 5 days. Bananas vary, 3 to 4 days, depends. And canned goods can usually be kept for a year. Okay, let's move on to freezing. 0 degrees Fahrenheit or less. And notice here, these are in months. So ground beef, again, wouldn't be kept as long as types of cuts of meat that are not cut or ground. So large cuts like roast can last longer because there's not as much surface area, and they also haven't been processed as much with just cutting and having potential exposure to microorganisms. Bacon, you can freeze for up to a month. Cooked whole ham, 1 to 2 months of frozen temperature. Luncheon meats, not recommended. Hot dogs can be frozen for up to a month. Sausages, fresh, smoked, and dry. You can freeze frozen sausages up to 2 months, but smoked and dry is not recommended. More freezing. Here you have fish. The recommended storage times apply to commercially frozen fish. Storage length drops by about half if fish or shellfish is frozen at home. Freezing is not recommended for shucked clams and oysters, blue crab meat, and whole lobsters. So that's your little asterisk there. But most shellfish can be kept frozen for 6 to 9 months. Breaded fish or shellfish can be kept longer. That breading preserves it even more. Okay, poultry, whole chickens or whole turkeys, whole birds can be kept for a year. But when you start cutting it, that's when you get the lower holding time, because you've introduced bacteria just by cutting it. Okay, and then dairy products, ice cream can be kept for about 3 months. And then produce, vegetables can be kept from 8 to 12 months. Fruits, 12 months. Nuts, if they're unsalted, 9 to 12 months. If they are salted, 6 to 8 months. And then herbs can be frozen and kept up to a year. Let's talk for a minute about nutrient retention. Your macronutrients, carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, and fat-soluble vitamins and minerals largely retain their integrity during these food preservation processes. However, water-soluble vitamins are more likely to be lost during cooking. The USDA nutrient retention table provides data for nutrient retention using standard cooking techniques for selected food. Even unprocessed, fresh-cut produce loses vitamin C over time. Freezing green vegetables results in significantly less folate loss if they're blanched first, which for that you would have boiling water and you would allow the vegetable to contact the boiling water, and it seals in the color but also the nutrients to some degree. In summary, we looked at the biological, chemical, and physical changes of food spoilage. We described food preservation methods of drying, smoking, curing, fermentation, pickling, edible coatings, and canning. We listed all the factors to consider when refrigerating or freezing food and compared the different types of heat preservation, boiling, pasteurization, and ohmic. Explained other preservation methods of irradiation, radiofrequency. We really didn't talk about radiofrequency, so check your textbook on that. Pulsed light, high pressure processing, and ozonation. Recognize the food nutrients that are and are not affected by processing. This is a quick review of food processing. you can study this even as much more in depth. There are whole fields of study about food packaging. So we do want to do what we can to preserve the food and the nutrients in the food, because we don't need to throw food away unless it's spoiled or contaminated. And if we can do anything to keep it from getting spoiled sooner rather than later, it's better. So I'm sure you've noticed this with your own food supply. All right, well, that's all I have. Please double check with your textbook on any more details to understand any of the vocabulary or the terms we talked about. And I hope this helps you not only for understanding it for your class, but also for your own use in the future. Until next time, this is Dr. Burnett.